Welcome, Jennifer Webster. We're so glad to have you on our first Valley Arts Mentors webinar. You are the Executive Director of Big Brothers Big Sisters of Franklin County, and there's two other branches, if you will, of Big Brothers Big Sisters in the Valley. I know in Hampshire and Hamden. And I guess I'd like to start off just by letting you talk a little bit about Big Brothers Big Sisters in general. I mean, I know I'd always heard of you, because it's like a 50-year-old organization. You sort of grow up knowing that Big Brothers Big Sisters exists, and you sort of have an idea of what it is just by the name. But maybe you could just describe in a little more detail what you do on a sort of day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Hey, Jonathan, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. It's good to see you again, although not quite in person, but it's the closest we get these days.
We're doing what we can.
Yes, absolutely. So in general, Big Brothers Big Sisters has been around nationally for over 100 years, and in this area for about 53. And we do one-to-one mentoring with youth and placing them in the lives of older teenagers or adults who can give them attention and consistency and be someone who can help them see future goals and their greatest potential of their dreams. And we do that traditionally pre-COVID. All of that is in person, and with these relationships where we spend time either a couple of times a month for longer periods, or our teenagers would meet weekly. And then COVID hit, and we had to really look at the core values of mentoring and what those pieces are and how we could adapt them to this life of social distance and a virtual worlds, at least temporarily. And we've learned some incredibly valuable lessons and learned that face-to-face contact is not the only way that you can connect as a mentor with other with your mentee or with other people and with youth, and that there's real value in having consistent connection and friendship and support, even if you can't see that person face to face. So we've really learned some valuable lessons during COVID about how we can still keep people connected and mentored and being mentors and menteed.
Yeah, nice. Is that generally through sort of Zoom based, like the meetings happen over Zoom, or there's certain activities that, sort of Zoom based activities?
Yeah, we use Zoom a lot, and our matches are meeting, but we also, some of our younger members, our youth, they really like to use other platforms. Like they want to chat through WhatsApp, or they want to chat through Instagram or other social media. They want an online game. And until recently, those were activities that we asked our mentors not to do with their mentees. We asked, to not sit on a screen and do video games. We asked them to go out in the world. And then COVID hit, and we said, well, can you connect through video games if that's where your little is at? And it's proven to be just as effective. When you take a passion that a child has, or a youth, a young person, whether they're an adult or not, you take something that someone is very passionate about, and you say, I don't know much about that world, teach me, I want to learn. And you reverse those roles a little bit, you do really incredible relationship building in that. So we've had some mentors who never had social media and have learned how to use Instagram so they can chat, because a lot of our youth don't have cell phones or cell plans, but they do have internet now. COVID has certainly helped kickstart in Western Massachusetts and up in Franklin County some more internet access that's affordable. So a lot of our families now have internet, and so they can have social media accounts, and they can still stay connected when maybe they don't have a cell phone or another way. Online games. So we have mentors who are loving online scavenger hunts or Scrabble, or other fun board games that they like to play in person that they can still do online. So there's lots of ways they're connecting.
Right. So sort of fast forwarding to, the quote unquote new normal, when in-person mentoring is possible again. Maybe actually, or we could say backing up to just, maybe you could just walk us through a little bit about, it's sort of like there's a kind of a recruitment process that I would imagine has to happen. Everyone is volunteering. The bigs are all volunteering, I know. And there's a pretty substantial commitment. Maybe you could just describe that commitment and sort of how, it's sort of that recruitment training piece before there's a match.
Absolutely. So when we're looking at putting adults for my agency, into a youth's life, so a minor under 18, there's child safety and thorough vetting is really important to make sure that we're building really healthy relationships for youth. So we recruit adults or older teens who have actually not that many criteria. We ask that you enjoy spending time with children. We ask that you can commit to consistent communication, and that you can have non-judgmental listening skills and acceptance and open-mindedness when hanging out with your little or spending time with them. We ask that you're a safe individual. So we certainly do safety checks and things on our adults. But the general criteria to be a mentor, people really get scared about it, and they feel like you have to be an expert, or you have to be, you really have to have all the answers. And we tell people time and time again, you definitely don't. Everyday people who are living their everyday lives are amazing mentors, and they don't know it. But you just have to be caring and kind and consistent, and you have to be wanting to show up for a kid and build a relationship with somebody who could really use your motivation and your positivity to help ground them and help them see the potential that they have in the future. And so once someone comes to us, we do lengthy interview processes, and we do home visits, which currently are being done virtually. And eventually we'll go back to in-person. We do reference checks and background checks, and a thorough vetting process of all of those mentors.
Right. And is it like the minimum commitment to become a mentor is?
We ask for a year.
Yeah.
As in the community program, we're saying that those are adults who are meeting with children out in the world. So they would normally be meeting with a child, taking them out to do something. And that's usually about twice a month for a couple of hours at a time. Once our matches get into it a little bit more, we often have matches that after 2 or 3 years of mentoring and they want to have relationships, they maybe go down to once a month, but they'll spend a whole day together. And those things are a little bit fluid. Our teenage mentors, we have once a week meetings. Typically they were on a campus, or they were at a site, and they were meeting for about 2 hours once a week. Virtually, that's actually down to a half an hour once a week, because these typically tend to be our younger children who have a lot of screen time in their life already, and attention spans are hard. And we're proving that a half an hour once a week is just as impactful as 2 hours once a week. So we're learning some really valuable lessons about that long-term commitment that we used to have, that is still really important, but that we really held on to. We're learning that might be more fluid than we thought. There might still be more impact than we thought there was, in less frequent, shorter interactions.
Right. So, you've mentioned impact a couple of times, and, as you know, we're working together, with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Franklin County on this Project Valley Arts Mentors, which is really actually one of our first program is matching experienced artists in the community with 15 plus years of professional experience with early career artists, people who are older than your usual group, 18 plus. But we're also trying to, we have a vision about serving artists and the arts community in the long term in the Valley. And one of the things that arts organizations can struggle with is demonstrating impact. You sort of know you're doing good, and that kids or teens or adults are benefiting because they're coming back, and their parents or guardians tell you about the impacts, or the kids tell you how much they whatever. You have this feeling, but sometimes that's hard to make concrete, say, when you're making an argument for funding or that kind of thing. How do you measure impacts?
It's a really great question. I think it's a question that any type of nonprofit who's trying to do any type of service work asks, right? Because we have these feelings, these guts, these intuitions, these experiences that tell us that our work is working and making an impact. But how do you put that on paper? And my suggestion for anyone really is surveys. And it's not it's not a popular word with many, and it's, I think, and sometimes overutilized in different areas of the world. But I think the best way to look at, are you impacting a person, whether that's a young person or a young adult, or someone new in their career, is you ask them in the beginning how they feel about what they're doing. But you also ask things about self-confidence. You ask about their baseline of what their skills are, how, their trust, their self-accountability. You ask sort of these baseline questions, and then you continue to survey them throughout their experience and see where those changes are. I also think it's really important to ask the person who's receiving the services, as well as the mentee, as well as the mentor, and perhaps other people in the mentee's life, so that you're getting a clear picture of, has their attitude about this thing changed? Has their skill level improved? Has their self-confidence improved? Have you seen more commitment to practice time, or more commitment to various things? And I really feel like that's the best way to gauge how someone is doing, and where that improvement lies, outside of the regular, say you're learning to play the piano, you obviously can see some of those improvements as you improve on your skill. But I really think it's important to look at things, like I said, attitude and self-confidence and trust of others, and your ability to accept positive feedback. Things like those are really important when looking at, does mentorship have a long-term impact on this person? Because say you learn those skills in 6 months, do you have the foundation to continue to build on those skills? Has that mentor given you a longer term gift, as opposed to those shorter moments?
That's great. When I have seen surveys used really well in the sort of arts realm. Are there, for an artist or an arts organization who hasn't used them before, is there like a place you go to, or a place you would suggest, if you're crafting your first survey to measure impact? Are there specific resources? And we can always, post them in the chat on this later, but is there a place you would suggest going to?
Yeah, that's a great question. All of my surveys come from the Big Brothers Big Sisters of America national organization, and they're created with input from all of the affiliates around the country, as well as the National Leadership Council. And they're taken from national statistics and databases that have been looking at positive youth development for 100 or plus years. So if you're looking at creating a survey in this type of a way for the first time, I would say try to find other organizations around the country who are doing similar work, and take examples that they have, and really look at those and tease out what feels like wording or language that would really work for you. Hopefully you can find other organizations that are successful and have been doing this for a while. But I think it's always really good to go to the experts. And so, to look at who's already doing this work successfully, and what are they using, as opposed to creating it completely from scratch. And, maybe that isn't an arts organization. Maybe there are other organizations, maybe like Big Brothers Big Sisters, where you're taking some of our surveys and you're looking at those and the questions that we ask, that are looking at social emotional determinants of health, and looking at how youth are doing emotionally in their relationships, and comparing those to things that you're wanting to look at too.
Right. Yeah. When you mentioned something about, looking at how youth are doing emotionally, one of the, I'm just going to stick with the sort of, you could call it funding, or anyone's support, supporting the community, just making the case for your work, your organization. one of the sort of general ways that arts organizations and even like sort of regional arts representatives, when they're going to the State House to make the case for arts funding, they talk about emotional intelligence and the arts as a way of building emotional intelligence for young people. In terms of sort of looking for resources to help make your case, I know there's actually like a pretty substantial body of research about mentoring out there. Are there some particular places you would, or just, straight up statistics that you think could be useful for arts organizations when they're sort of making the case? If they have a program for young people that's sort of structured, obviously it's not structured the way you're structuring it, but it's a long-term relationship. It's a substantial program where there's the goal really is arts plus, helping this young person develop various sort of emotional intelligence, for example. Are there studies or particular places you like to go to make your case?
Absolutely. The Search Institute is a phenomenal mentoring hub that has lots of statistics and database information and research that they've done that they share out. There's several frameworks about mentoring and the long-term impact of mentoring. So it's the Search Institute. They're a phenomenal place to go, and I would highly suggest checking those out. Mass Mentoring Partnership is a Massachusetts state organization that does matching grants for mentoring 26 mentoring organizations around the state, including Big Brothers Big Sisters organizations, several of them. And they also have some really great information and resources on their website to help to look at all kinds of data and reports and things that have been collected. So I would probably start with those two. And from those two, there's tons of resources that they have to send you out to other folks as well. But those are some really great places to start.
Nice. That's great. One of the first, first things when we first started talking about partnering with Big Brothers Big Sisters Franklin County and thinking about ways in which your take on mentorship could inform, an arts-based program, is sort of going back to this 1-year commitment. Typically arts programs, say for young people, they might be 3 months, they might be 6 months, they might be for the school year. Obviously if it's a school-based program, it can be for the school year. But for when kids are going to, the after-school theater program, which is something I'm familiar with, or the after-school dance, etc., these tend to be in sort of shorter chunks, like the fall. Or they can even be like, come for our weekend workshop, or a 1-day special event workshop kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, you're sort of talking about how during COVID, you're discovering that there's actually, there's more efficacy in some other formats than you had previously suspected. I'm not asking you to tell me that 3 months is good enough or anything like that, but I'm just sort of wondering about, for arts organizations that, there's very clear reasons why we often do it that way. One is, maybe parents aren't ready to make that kind of commitment. It's just sort of an easier chunk, or it's, that's about how much time to make that play or whatever. But I'm just wondering if there are certain threads or practices which kind of come into the 1-year thing, which maybe artists or arts organizations who are in these shorter cycles could think about incorporating, borrowing, stealing.
Sure. It's a really interesting timing of that question, actually, because there is a researcher, Jean Rhodes, is her name, and she's been a leader in mentoring research internationally for, Jean, I sincerely apologize if you ever see this. I don't know how long. I'm going to say, well over 30 years, but, but I could be wrong on that time frame, but certainly a leader. in this field. And she just did a really long-term study that very surprisingly, she spent her whole life studying mentorship, and very surprisingly showed that these long-term, what they call friendship-based mentoring programs, which is what Big Brothers Big Sisters is. It's a mentoring program that's long-term, and it's based on general relationship building and friendship building. Those are very effective. However, these short-term targeted programs that are what you're talking about, a 3-month specific program for that, that writes a play, or these shorter term workshops, until very recently were seen as ineffective. And in fact, some research showed that they were harmful, because to build a relationship in a young person's life that was an intense and supportive thing, and then potentially take that away so quickly, could actually do more damage than it could be doing good. And Jean's research, very surprisingly, showed that that is not the case, and that these, in fact, short-term projects have real impact as well, because they're targeted. So short-term friendship-based relationships still are showing that they can do more harm than good. But the targeted programs that are looking at specifics, and exactly what VAM is looking at, to take two people with a very similar or the same passion, but one person having lots of experience and expertise in the field, and somebody else, the young person, starting out fresh and new and from the bottom, and focusing on building a specific relationship around that passion or that project that is short term, is actually much, much more valuable than research had been showing for the last 100 years. So I would encourage you to look up Jean Rhodes and some of the work that she's doing. There was a book about this that was supposed to have come out in June, and I don't know if it did. I think COVID may have paused that release, but it certainly is. She gave a talk recently in Amherst, Massachusetts, that I'm sure you can find out there on this exact topic. So it's very great timing to look at that. And I think there's absolute research that shows that these shorter term projects, mentorship projects, are just as effective as the long-term friendship-based ones.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
For the arts community.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, this sort of question of, I actually hadn't heard that term, friendship-based mentoring, because in the arts it tends to be, because there's this idea of you're making something, whether it's a play or it's in a painting class, or it's, there's always that kind of object of what they're, you're not working on the friendship per se. Of course, you can have exercises that help, if it's theater, your team, team building, it's all happening, but that's not the express, it's sort of a different philosophy. It's actually making me think of these, there's something called National Outdoor Leadership School, which is a experiential outdoor education thing. And then there's something called Outward Bound. And I've sort of checked out of that world 25 years ago, but my understanding 25 years ago was that basically Outward Bound would take these team building things and put them in the front. Like, now we're going to put you through an exercise where the point is kind of, we're not going to tell you, but the point is we're going to, you're going to be stranded on an island together for 24 hours. We'll see you in a day. Good luck. So it's sort of creating this situation, whereas Knowles had this other approach where we're going to get from here to there, and things are going to happen, but we're not going to create. It's just getting the, it's sort of the leadership stuff just happens as we all try to, canoe down this river or whatever. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what's coming to mind about whether, sort of.
Sure. And you can even look at it in terms of summer camp. So lots of people, whether, if you've had the blessing of being able to being sent to summer camp that you loved, an overnight camp, lots of kids will say, I went, to summer camp for 2 weeks every summer. And I had one summer, I had this amazing counselor, And, they loved rowing as much as I did. And we talked about rowing and they showed me some techniques. And I still remember that to this day, 40 years later, how much that person motivated me to, to continue to learn to row. That's a couple of week or maybe even a summer at best experience for somebody. But that's an impact that 30 years later is still sticking with somebody. And so if you think about it in practicality, in the actual real world, I think we can all come up with very good examples in our own lives of times that we've seen these very short-term relationships built on something that's targeted and something that's very specific around a common goal or a common passion. And that those are really long lasting in the same way that these longer term friendship based things are. So, I think it's exciting to have that colliding, that research colliding at the same time that COVID collides for me personally and for our mentoring agencies and affiliates, is to looking at, here's a great opportunity to think outside the box in all kinds of ways for mentoring. And how do we support other organizations like VAM, and how do we support other mentoring relationships with artists and various things, to really look at how mentoring doesn't need to be quite so quite so single focused. I think it can really be broadened in a way that is an exciting thing for the field right now. So I'm glad that you're in it with us, and I'm glad you're exploring these fun things right now. It's a good time to be here.
I'm glad to be. I'm glad I'm having this excuse to ask you questions to to learn more. Anyway, but so I want to. It's not exactly shifting gears, but I'm just thinking as you're talking about training and monitoring. Once the match is made, or I know you have specific ways that trainings where you bring in the bigs and you train them in this or that aspect of what's going on. So in a say a typical small arts organization, you might have one full-time person, a couple part-time people, everyone's doing some teaching, for example. There's often not all the time for, say, training that you would hope for, but at the same time, because artists tend to be communicative by nature, they're sort of not all the time, but often artists are great they have teaching skills they've just been developing them, even though they maybe have never been formally trained as a teacher, etc. So in that way, sometimes maybe small arts organizations can get away with less training than some other types of organizations. But I'm just wondering, in terms of the way you look at training and monitoring the match, are there aspects of that training that you think might be worthwhile thinking about ways to infuse that into how arts organizations think about training and so say you're running a 6-month program, like, okay, we're at the 3-month point. How is it going? If we're going to have a sort of time out of time, like now I'm the artistic director, I'm going to sit down with my teaching artists and talk about what's working, what's not working. Obviously it's all ongoing and it's all relationship based, but I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Sure. I think consistency is key. I think it's really important to train your artists and your mentors to be consistent in their communication, in their support, in their feedback, whatever piece it is that they feel like there is the most valuable that they're providing to their mentee in this program, is to just remember that it's easy to lose steam. It's easy to lose track of things or to let something slide a little bit. But you're going to make the strongest impact when your passion is consistent. So I think that's important to train in the beginning. And then if you're the one who's leading the leaders, so you're the arts director and you're gathering these mentors, you as an arts director also need to be just as consistent with that feedback and that support of those mentors. So, it's really a chain. And I think so, great example of 3-month check-in. I think it's important to consistently check in with your mentors and let them use each other to talk about what's working and what's not, what challenges they have and what's not. I also think being open-minded and inclusive is absolutely key. And remembering that everybody comes from different backgrounds and different situations and life experiences and lived experiences. And you're not going to be able to build a relationship with a person who doesn't feel like you value where they came from. And if you can't build a relationship and trust with somebody, you're not going to be a very good teacher, no matter how great your skills are that you have to give. So really just reminding people of that inclusivity and that open-mindedness to really look at where their mentee came from, is coming from, is, the experience that they're currently living in their life, and how that plays into their ability to motivate themselves or be passionate about their work or find time to practice or find patience to continue to work on a skill that's really difficult for them. That all of those things are intertwined. And so I think for mentors, that piece is absolutely key. But it can be hard to sustain that themselves. And there can be unforeseen challenges that they, working with any humans, it can be more difficult than you anticipated. Making connections with people can be harder than you'd think sometimes. So, really having the leader of that arts organization be just as supportive to the mentors as you're asking the mentors to be of their mentees, and staying consistent with that support is really key.
Yeah. And in terms of like when you bring in your bigs, like at whatever it is, 3 months, 6 months mark, is there an example of a specific kind of exercise or conversation starter that, you feel like is particularly impactful or particularly you're like, oh yeah, that's a great one?
I love icebreakers. I know people hate them. It puts people on the spot and they don't love them. I think a good icebreaker can be the key to leading a successful group discussion or support group. So I use them all the time, even though people groan about them. And even though I personally don't always love when others do them to me. So we have monthly meetings for our mentors and we try to do icebreakers. If there's enough, sometimes only a couple of participants are able to come. So then it's just more of an open forum. But, I think it's important that they feel like you're there for them as well. So often those icebreakers have to do with how they're doing or their challenges. People don't usually want to be the first one to raise their hand and say, I'm having a hard time, if they in their head feel like everybody else is being really successful in their matches or in their programs that they're working in. So often those icebreakers will try to ask people to bring up challenges so that everyone feels like they're in the same boat, because everybody struggles at some point or another, no matter how strong their relationship is, or how trained or skilled they are in that profession. So I think forcing people to get together and forcing people to have some of those conversations are really good and healthy to sustain motivation and passion and connection and consistency, for everybody. So I think your leadership is equally as important as the mentors themselves. Because if the mentors don't feel a part of something and they don't feel like they have someone who is going to help motivate them to really be that leader that you're asking of them, then relationships, they don't build as strong as we'd like them to.
Right. And is the so typically during those meetings with the bigs, there's a time where people are just sort of an open forum where people just share what's working, what's not working?
Absolutely. Sometimes we'll have important information for our agency. We do a lot of work around education around substance abuse and substance use, and youth mental health and things like that. So sometimes there'll be information that we'll share because a research project recently released some data, or there's a short film that that we recommend that people watch. So we'll share that information, and sometimes we have discussions based upon those things. Or we hear a thread, we check in monthly with all of our guardians, our littles and our bigs, and maybe there's a thread we heard in some of those check-ins throughout the month of several people having the same challenge. So then we might do a small presentation about that specific topic. So sometimes they're more targeted. There's always time for open discussion. And sometimes they're just a support group. They're just an open discussion about come and share your good stories and what's happening and things, ways that you've been successful, and share those hard challenges that you have that you might want some support or suggestions on from your peers.
Yeah. I know we're getting close to the end of our time. I just have maybe a couple more questions.
Sure.
When you feel or get the feedback that a mentor mentee match is struggling for whatever reason, I know there's a million different reasons why.
Sure.
Can you just walk us through how you approach that situation where, I know it might be hard. You could maybe just give a concrete example of a kind of mismatch or a kind of struggle, and how you would try to support or maybe decide that it's not the right match or that kind of thing.
Sure. It doesn't happen that often, but we certainly have cases where we think it's going to be a great match, and maybe the big and the little really do connect, and it's great. But we consistently hear from the mentor that they struggle to communicate with the little's guardian. And often we hear in that same token that a mentor struggles with the boundaries or rules, or lack thereof, boundaries and rules that exist in a little's home. And the mentor really feels like those things are unhealthy or not positive for that youth's development. And they care about this child, and they want to make sure that this child is doing really well, and they struggle with that. So that could maybe be that a parent smokes inside the home, and our mentor is a healthcare professional. And our mentor says, I know how toxic secondhand smoke is, and my little has asthma, and really struggling with that. And there's nothing that anyone can really do about that. We certainly can't ask a parent to stop smoking inside the home. Certainly those parent has likely had lots of education around secondhand smoke and health, and we can try to do those things. However, it's not always successful. And in those cases, it's really just about listening to the mentor and listening over and over and over, and assuring them that we hear that they're worried, and we understand why they're worried, and what can they do without changing that situation to help continue to support that little. And, hopefully in this case, we get to that point where the big begins to be able to focus on health education with the little, and doing some fun activities and fun education to that little around why smoking, them choosing to smoke as a young person is bad for their health, without shame and blame of their parent, but continuing education so that mentor feels like they are impacting the long-term aspect of that youth's health while they can't change the moment. And sometimes those types of things end up resulting in a match closure, because a big just is not able to, doesn't feel comfortable continuing to support a little because the anxiety and stress is too much. Or they can't, they have struggles with that parent or guardian, and end up hurting that relationship, and they can't continue. Often though, we're able to get a mentor to a place where they can comfortably continue to mentor, and their little they can maintain that relationship, and we can continue to support them through those challenges. So the other thing we do, I know we're close on time, but we do have volunteer clinicians. We have a relationship with two phenomenal clinicians in the area who volunteer time to come to mentor support groups. They also come to staff meetings sometimes, and offer support to mentors and staff around really specific challenging situations that we ourselves are not sure how to handle, or a mentor needs a little bit more professional support than we're able to handle. So we tap into, as I said before, you find the experts. We tap into all of the expertise of others that we can in our community to collaborate and build a network around our mentors so that they feel as supported as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. Last year we started running a program that also incorporates like a mental health professional as part of the team, and yeah, interesting. You touched on in that response just something else that I want to quickly get to, which is just the relationship of the parent or guardian to this whole situation. So obviously, if you're running this minimum 1 year commitment, you have ways of incorporating, orienting the parent or guardian, who's in relationship with obviously the little and then the mentor, in arts organizations, arts projects. It can literally, now with COVID, it's like, keep your mask on and just drop them off.
Sure.
Don't get out of your car. That's the kind
Sure.
of. But even in that situation, I've seeing my son go through different arts programs and then programs that we're running. It's always a question of like how much you're asking of the parents or guardians, how involved they are. Often you actually need their help for different, obviously just to help facilitate. It can go really beyond transportation, and then there's also, even if it's now with COVID, setting simple boundaries, like, because of state regulations, we ask them to drop them off in this way. So I guess maybe as a final question, just talking a little bit about how you orient the parent or guardian to this process. Obviously it's probably the parent or guardian who's thought this was a good idea and brought it to the attention of their little, but still, and I think it's also really helpful when you talk about, different challenges, like, a challenging situation with which you kind of just addressed, but, how you negotiate that sort of triangle.
Absolutely. I would say parent engagement is the hardest aspect of our job. Harder than finding mentors and volunteers, harder than training them or managing those things. The parent engagement piece is the most challenging, because often for us, youth who are coming to us in our programs are youth that need extra attention and connection. Whether that's that they don't have enough adults in their life and there's too much strain and pressure already on the caregivers in their lives, or those caregivers, maybe they work a lot, or they're in foster homes or other things. And so, they need more adults in their life. So often it's difficult to engage with the current adults that are already there. An adult, the parent has to give permission. So sometimes a school counselor or someone else will actually recommend this program, but the adult, the caregiver the guardian has to actually sign up that child, and they have to do an interview themselves. And in that interview, we try really hard to educate them about what it is that we do expect from them, and what it is that we hope can happen, and what it is that we can't accept. And I think being really clear about those expectations from the very beginning is really helpful for a parent. They want you to be upfront. They want to know exactly what you are and are not going to ask of them later. And so coming up with what your expectations are in really concrete ways and communicating that is important. COVID hits. All of a sudden everyone has new expectations and new needs from parents and guardians, and likely more. We've experienced much more need to involve a parent in things. Our after school programs can't walk from school anymore over to their program site and meet with their big anymore, and their parent just needs to give them a ride home. Then now the parent has to remember their Zoom meeting and help a child log on to Zoom, make sure there's a device accessible and a quiet space in the home. Lots of things that didn't exist before. And I think we put a lot more pressure on guardians than we typically do, and it's been really hard for them. So I think it's just ongoing, and it needs to be fluid, and everybody needs to be really patient with each other. But in the beginning, really setting that framework of clear expectations is absolutely vital. We also offer training throughout the time that a match is with us for all kinds of things that parents can opt into if they want to. But we don't expect that of them. And we tell them that our job is to attempt to make their child's life more connected without asking more of them, and that we do our best to honor that.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been great. I could talk to you for another hour at least.
I know. We could both chat all day, Jonathan.
And, you know, Valley Arts Mentors at the moment is not specifically offering a program for, you know, teens and children. I mean, PT Theater, of course, is, but I would just point out that you and I have had this conversation about, you know, if there are artists who end up watching this who think, oh, you know, maybe I could be a big, you know, maybe that would be an enriching thing. Or if there's a parent or a guardian who ends up watching this who thinks, oh, you know, actually I have a child who maybe this could be a good fit, and they happen to be a piano player or whatever, that you have a way of, you know, that they could sort of, in the application process, they could point that out, and that you would do your best to actually make an arts-based match in the sort of, I mean, of course, it's still the big brother, big sister framework with all the expectations and the guidelines, but that there could be sort of an arts-based big brother, big sister match.
Absolutely. And we inherently match bigs and littles based on lots of things, including interests and passions, as well as proximity and lifestyle and, you know, age preferences and all kinds of things. But we absolutely would love to have more arts-based matches in our organization. And so I think if littles or bigs ever see this and think, you know what, I would love to be matched through a BBBS program with a big or a little who shares this arts passion that I have, I absolutely suggest them to come to us, and we will try to find them a great match.
I want to thank you so much, Jennifer, for taking this time. And, you know, it's just processing this as a teaching artist, you know, it's sort of like, it's just helpful to hear someone doing similar but different work talk about their work. And thank you. And
you're very welcome. Thanks for inviting me and collaborating on this whole thing, this whole project. I think it's been a great experience, and anything that I can do. You know, I guess I would say I'm an artist myself. I was a painter for many years and a poet starting very, very young. And I can't say that with my teenage children in the past 10 years, I found a ton of time to do those things. But I'm very passionate about making sure that people are connecting around things that interest them and things that give them joy. So I love this collaboration. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for letting me chat.
You're welcome. So Valley Arts Mentors, the website is artsmentors.org. To learn more, this is a project that has really been made possible by through funding from the Community Foundation of Western Mass, and foundation originally from the Barr funding to the Barr Foundation to the Community Foundation of Western Mass, which enabled a lot of the work around the foundation's Valley Creates initiative. And we're grateful for that. And we're trying to make good on it. So with that, goodbye, good luck. And I think through the magic of Scott McPherson and Holyoke Media, we'll post also, what's your website, Jennifer?
We are at BBBS-FC.org.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening, and please stay in touch. Be well.